Okay, in this section, we're going to talk about the other side of the model, aggregate demand. So this just means total demand for all goods and services in an economy. And it's the total planned expenditure in the economy. So with aggregate supply, we saw it was planned production. Here, aggregate demand is planned expenditure. Okay, so pretty much the same thing. Very, very similar to the supply and demand model we saw in Chapter 3, right? But now we're talking about the entire economy, not just a particular market like the market for gasoline or the market for peanut butter or Coke or something like that, right? So everything in the economy. So what we need to think about is what determines the total amount that individuals, governments, firms, and foreigners want to spend, because that's really what we're talking about with aggregate demand. We're talking about our expenditure approach to GDP equation. So recall GDP equals consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus foreign expenditure, right? So that, as it turns out, is our aggregate demand model. Okay, so what determines these expenditures in the economy? And then also another good question is what determines the equilibrium price level? So we'll see what happens, right? We'll answer these questions moving forward here. So again, aggregate demand is just planned expenditure in economy. So the aggregate demand curve is a curve that shows how planned expenditures change given changes in price level, right? So what are the planned purchase rates for all final goods and services in the economy at various different price levels, assuming that we're holding everything else constant. So it looks just like our usual demand curve that we've already seen from Chapter 3. It's a downward sloping curve. Really, the only difference here between the model in Chapter 3 and this model is that rather than price, we have price level. Okay, then that's because it's all of the goods and services in the economy, all of which have different prices. So we can't measure these things in terms of a single price. We have to think of it in terms of the overall price level, since we're looking at the demand for everything as well as the production of everything when we're thinking about supply, aggregate supply. But we can't think of these things as a price, as having a price, because it's everything in the economy. So rather, we have to think of it in terms of a price level. What's the price level in the economy? And then also, you'll notice that rather than quantity down in the x-axis, we have trillions of dollars, right? So similar reason, since we're talking about lots of different goods and services, we can't really compare quantities of, say, cars with quantities of loaves of bread. So instead of adding them up and aggregating them in terms of their quantities, we aggregate them in terms of their real value, right? So that's why we see on the bottom GDP in terms of trillions of dollars rather than a quantity. But this is what an aggregate demand curve looks like. Okay, so what happens to planned expenditure when the price level rises? Well, there's a few different things that cause planned expenditure to change. So one thing that happens, one cause of the change is called the real balance effect, or sometimes called the wealth effect. Another one is called the interest rate effect. Another one's called the open economy effect. Okay, so we're going to look at these in detail, but these are the things that can affect planned expenditure as the price level changes. These are the things that basically account for its downward slope. And we kind of have something similar to the law of demand here, where basically we have an inverse relationship between expenditure and price level. So as the price level falls, total planned spending increases, and vice versa. When the price level rises, total planned spending decreases.